Right. Is it time? It's time. Is the recording on? Yes, it is. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, especially those of you who have already put up with us for an hour this morning in the user session. This is the developer meetup. This is a get-together that we have been having approximately every 3 months with our sister data facilities of the UK and in France, who are actually have decided to adopt the science platform in their own facilities. There has been a bunch of interest recently from other projects in perhaps doing the same. I'm going to say y'all don't know enough to have informed consent on what you're signing up for. So, but I know a lot of people are also interested in the development and technology. So we're going to open these up at least once a year at PCW and just have a developer kind of meetup, and people are kind of quite welcome to listen in. Be aware that, you know, we are going to be using jargon that goes way below the official names of things and package names and so on. And so it might get a little bit confusing, although we're going to try and jumpstart you a little bit with some of it. So let's see. The code of conduct, again, this is essentially a technical meeting. I understand people get excited and want to break in, that's fine. Zoom hands will take priority. Helps to be on the right laptop. Please use, if you at all have access to Slack, please use the Slack in preference to the Zoom chat so we can actually get back to questions after the fact. I still have a bunch of questions from this morning I want to get back to, by the way. I have not walked away from that Slack yet, but that would be really far preferable. And my helper here for the session is Simon Gurkov from Square, my product owner, who is going to make sure we don't miss anything that comes up on the Slack channel. So thank you, Simon. And thank you, Christine, for your duties this morning. So this is a developer session. If you find it incomprehensible, I apologize in advance. If we have time and anybody wants to go back and ask kind of more basic infrastructure questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end. All right, so here is your kind of orientation slide. And the format of these is I will go through and basically cover the kind of recent code changes in the various services and kind of some of our upcoming changes and whether I recommend that people on our code bases, you know, go to master or hold on for a bit because it's churn right now. And then we will also hear, it's a roundtable format, we will also hear from the UK and the French data facility on their updates and what they've been up to and what problems they've encountered. Would like to very much thank those data facilities that pushed us to you know, think a lot more generically about the deployment of our code bases. So it's great that we have this collaboration. So yeah, your reminder is that the user sees 3 aspects to the science platform. That is the kind of the official user-facing kind of framing of the platform. In fact, the science platform is actually a platform on a kind of software services level. It is a collection of currently about 20 Kubernetes-based services, and there's more coming, especially in the API section. And we generally internally refer to those by their repository names, but I'm just going to quickly just go through to orient anybody who's just dropped in because they're curious. So in purple at the bottom, we have you know, kind of Kubernetes level services that are that we use to provide infrastructure services like ingress, security, service security management, like vault certificates, and so on. And we use Argo CD to manage our Kubernetes deployments. On kind of the layer kind of above that, we have the services that are backing the RSP. There are services that back the specific three aspects. That's the portal. That's the services for the notebook service. And I'm going to quickly explain what a few of them are, because I think at least one of them might be different since the last time we spoke. So Nublado 2 is the actual, Jupyter as a service, Jupyter Lab as a service repository, which has Jupyter Hub configuration in it. Cache Machine is also sometimes referred to internally as the pre-puller. This is a service that actually anticipates what images people are going to be pulling and pre-populates them on the Kubernetes nodes so that startup is quick. And this is why when you start up a container, you get one in 20 seconds instead of 3 minutes, because the science pipeline containers are huge. They're actually somewhere between 10 and 20 gigabytes. So they're actually quite considerable. Moneypenny is a relatively recent service that we were driven to develop because one of our security enclaves objected to the level of privileges available to the user container. So Moneypenny is a service that is a sidecar container that is privileged and creates any privileged actions associated with new users, like, for example, making you a home space if you're in an environment that doesn't pre-allocate home spaces. And then leaves the user in a less privileged container. So that's what that is. And it can actually perform other sidecar setup functions, because we wrote it as a more generalized service. But that was its initial motivation. And there are, of course, the Kubernetes user namespaces that are associated with user pods, and in the future Dask pods and so on. The API is as we mentioned this morning, is looking a little bit sad because we still haven't gotten to the VO image services in any serious way. But we do have our TAP and OpsTop services up and deployed. Credit to the Canadian CDC team, whose TAP service we are using as the core TAP server, and we have a very good collaboration with them, and we upstream code to them, and that works really great. Then we have the kind of umbrella applications and their support. So Square One is a landing page that has the homepage and any associated pages that we want to give access to users that kind of are above the three aspects or sideways to the three aspects. And as we mentioned today, we now have Semaphore, which is the notification system we're developing now in alpha/beta. That puts up the notifications on the homepage, and it's actually quite fully featured. You can actually schedule a regular notification that will automatically go up on Thursday morning and say, hey, it's Thursday, there's patch Thursday this afternoon, and then it will take itself off. So very convenient for us, especially since we're operating so many deployments. And finally, Gafalfar, which is our authentication and authorization service. And that has had a significant new release, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. And another service that we have developed internally is Mobu. Mobu is the monkey business. It's the service that actually essentially emulates user load by unleashing test user processes at our services to make sure that they're operating correctly, and also we can do scale testing with it. So currently we're exercising both the notebook and the authentication and the TAP service through Mobu. And so when we say that, earlier, before leading up to data preview 0.1, we did scale testing of 400 users. That means that we unleash 400 monkeys, automated testing processes, and they logged in and they run up notebooks and they executed the notebooks and then report the success or failure. So that's how we're able to make sure that both of the system remain performant and that there were no errors. You can essentially also use another context. For example, you're going to use it essentially as notebook CI. As a service provider, we don't yet have notebook CI as a user end service. All right, so that's some of the words that will come up as we discuss things. Oh, and of course, finally, the most importantly, Phalanx. Phalanx is our configuration layer that configures all our services. Is how we are able to manage so many deployments with such a small team. And it essentially manages the specific deployment environments. And we have discussed the right level of actually integrating with Phalanx for our data facility partners, where they stay on track in Phalanx and we can see what they're doing, but they're not depending on us being available in the middle of the night in the US so they can do a deployment in France. So we can talk a little bit about that later. I will also say that phalanx.lsst.io, which is the Phalanx documentation page, is also where we put in the general operational documentation. We have had pretty much zero of that so far. But recently we have started actually creating some basic maintenance operations so that people can cover for people when they're away, now that we have an external production service. So I'm hoping that in the next few months, there will be a lot more useful information, and we're hoping to find time for some more introductory information to put on that site as well. Simon, did I see a wave?
Yeah, there's a question. Katrin asks, did you try to push beyond 400 users? Did you find out if the system breaks at some point, and would break mean slow down, or does break mean total loss of the service?
Yeah, that's an absolutely excellent question. So let me explain how we're approaching the scale testing. So we tried 400 users. So obviously, as I said this morning, the end user goal for scaling is 8,000 to 10,000 users for this service. So the reason that we did 400 users is because the DP 0.1 target was to support 400 users. So we made sure that if everybody got on at the same time, which of course real users never really behave like that, but if everybody kind of got on at the same time, that we would be able to support them. Now, we are, as we're going through the data preview exercises and the user scaling goes, we're trying to go up at least like, half an order of magnitude at the time, so maybe next time we'll do about, 1,000, maybe the time after we'll do about 5,000, right? The reason we haven't done much scale testing up to now is because, of course, when we were in an in-house infrastructure, we were physically unable to suddenly emulate 10,000 users because our in-house data center did not have the capacity to deal with. Now that we have moved to the interim data facility, and the only question is how much of Will's money do I want to burn on any given day, we actually do have the capacity to run far higher user testing, which is why we've now developed this framework that will allow us to do so. So we are planning periodic stress tests. Now, as to what happens when you exceed your capacity, I can tell you that now, depending on the service, maybe bad things will happen. Nublado is not going to be so bad in the beginning. It's going to just add extra nodes, which take longer to kind of come online, but it will eventually service you. But some of the other services are not actually protected against, denial service mass level attacks. It is on our roadmap to be able to actually put a throttling capabilities in front of the services so that we can actually degrade service gracefully. In times of periodic stress, like DR1 just came out. And depending on the service, the reaction that you're going to get from the service, if it's stressed and overloaded and out of capacity, will differ. Some services will say, I'm sorry, we're too busy, come back later because, queue service currently slammed. Or it will say, I'm sorry, things will take longer than usual, but please be patient and it will happen. Or it will take you to a page saying, we are prioritizing certain user groups during this time or certain services or certain functions. So this is an engineering sprint that we're actually starting in the fall to deal with degradation of service under heavy load. I hope that answered the question. I don't have my Slack up. All right, so hopefully that answered the question, but let me just check.
Yes, thanks.
Yes, okay, all right, great, thank you. All right, so going forward, so for the developers, things that have happened, if you haven't paid attention since our last meeting in April or May, we did have the official release for Square One, although I think we had already been beta testing it in May, so you've seen it before. That's the umbrella page. The skinnability of that page is really quite reasonable. It uses a visual identity dictionary. So theoretically, we haven't seen anybody try it yet, but theoretically it could actually be skinned for your institutional credentials, so you can have your own acknowledgements to your own funding agencies or so on. Gefalfer 2.0, the ANA service, significant update with the token management, and I'm going to let Russ speak about this in one slide that's coming up. We have made a number of TAP improvements, especially in the light of now running production facilities that have access to different data holdings, right? So now when you go to a particular site, you just see the holdings for that site and so on. MOBU, again, the testing framework, significant improvements. We detected with the scale testing, we did detect a lot of transient issues that we have possibly been seeing, but that we weren't getting enough of them before to really get down to the bottom of them. So there's some like, you know, WebSocket timeouts and race conditions and little things like that that we've actually been going around fixing and making the service more reliable. We have the Semaphore Alpha authentication service, and we made a whole bunch of user experience improvements in light of what we saw the user experience to be for the data preview delegates, who are people who were not actually living and breathing the system as it was being developed. And so it was a very valuable experience to see what they got in trouble with. I feel like right now is a good time to get back in current if you've fallen behind, partly because of Gefalfer 2.0 being out, partly because we've just been so many improvements in the general reliability of the service. And there's going to be some fairly intensive work in the fall that you might want to hold off during that, especially if we started moving to JupyterLab 3.0. It'll be a while to get super stable again. All right, so I might throw over the slide to Russ to explain some of the ANA changes and challenges. Before I do that, I'm just going to put some very brief context, which is the Science Platform team acquired ANA fairly recently as a responsibility in this project. The initial design for ANA was, I'm going to say, a little bit optimistic based on current scenarios. It uses in common federation through CI logon for identity to establish who people are. And I think originally the project was really aimed at the idea that, you know, you're essentially servicing US users, and if they have an in common federation identity, they're probably the US institutions, so it's probably okay to let them in. With the increased kind of international user base that we are acquiring through the kind of data rights exchange within kind, and also with the increased scrutiny that we're having on our practices because of there being a high profile project, some of these kind of assumptions are not really holding up, and we may have to do significant work in this area. Just to explain, Gefalfer is essentially the service that actually hands, tokens to users to make sure that they're allowed to do what they want to do, but we don't actually manage identity information ourselves. It's done through the CI logon service, and at the moment, it's done. If you're a data preview delegate, it's done through GitHub. We essentially delegate identity management to GitHub. All right, Russ, you wanna tell us what's new?
Sure. So for background, for those who aren't familiar with the general design here, the goal of Gefalfer is to try to handle as much of the security problems on behalf of all the individual services as it can. So the hope is that the services are largely don't have to think about security, particularly authentication and authorization, and that's all handled via the Gefalfer layer, which is hooked in through Nginx as an auth request handler, which means that it sits in the middle of essentially all the traffic that happens inside the Rubin Science platform. So it's kind of a high criticality and high performance service because it has to do a lot of request handling. So the 2.0 release has changed the underlying storage model pretty significantly. So there's now a SQL database requirement that holds longer term information about users, and particularly holds a lot of logging information about the history of the tokens that they've created. There continues to be a Redis, which is used for immediate token validation, and there's a completely new API in 2.0 that provides, in addition to the pieces that are required to authenticate individual services, also has an admin API, the ability to forge tokens for administrator to forge a token on behalf of a user, which we use for things like Mobu for doing load testing, and which also can be used for other administrative things. User impersonation, for example, will be coming as a debugging tool for administrators of Science Platform, because sometimes it's just very, very difficult to figure out what problem a user is seeing unless you can actually go see what the user is seeing. The design is mostly implemented. The main piece that's missing right now is that we really want to log all of our authentication events for better security practices in the long run, for things like understanding attacks or being able to trace a compromise if we have one. And that's in order to offload that, so we're not doing SQL writes for every single request, which would just be untenable and unscalable. That will be offloaded to Kafka, and that requires Kafka infrastructure that we've not yet built out into the RSP, which we expect to do in the future. The other thing that there is a user token management page. Users can create tokens for themselves. It's a little bit more sophisticated than the one that we had before. There's a few more options. You can scope tokens down. It's much uglier than the one we had before because it's currently completely unstyled. So it's like literally just raw HTML with no styling work done whatsoever. The goal is to layer in the visual design model that we're using for the landing page into that token management screen as well, and make the whole thing look a little more coherent. The other thing I want to call out is that the new release simplifies the authentication model considerably. In the previous release, there were two different ways. There were essentially two different tokens. There was a JWT, and there was also an opaque token, because we had a requirement for very short tokens for some of our usages. Did a fair amount of poking around with security models and whatnot, and decided that this would be a lot easier and a lot simpler if we go with just opaque tokens across the board. So that is the way that it works now. It got rid of a fair amount of internal complexity. That does also make it very clear, and this was really already the case, but this makes it much more explicit, that authentication tokens are per installation. We're not attempting to be a distributed authentication system. The USDF is not expected to be an identity management system for every IDAC, for example. So the scope of the authentication is scoped to a particular installation of the Rubin Science Platform components.
Thanks for that, Ross. I'm just going to say a couple more things on this issue, because it's kind of very important to the developers. I realize it's not of necessarily general interest, which is there's a lot of kind of technical and schedule debt in this area from earlier in the project, and we do need to do it. It's a requirement. We can't go to operations without it. On the other hand, I have identified the kind of lack of image services as a much more higher priority item in light of the data preview program from pre-operations. And so we are going to delay the kind of next batch of work for a while we focus on other aspects of the RSP. I will also say I'm not entirely happy with any of the solutions that we really have for group management, and I'm doing the thing that I do, which is procrastinate, hoping that a better solution idea has strike us. We are listening to the kind of Will has proposed a number of alternative scenarios here, such as using ANA as a service. But we're just architecturally nowhere near being able to actually identify a route forward for that at this point. All right, so yes.
The one other thing I did want to explicitly say, and so that everybody knows this, and we've kind of gotten this on the record, the current version of the Rubin Science Platform, and particularly the notebook service, is not hardened for web security. It's probably possible to move laterally between notebooks. In fact, it's almost certainly possible to move laterally between notebooks. So a malicious user could compromise other users on the system. And there's also quite a bit of web security work that we believe we can lift up into the authentication authorization layer, but we haven't really started doing that. So DMTN 193 is a tech note on how we envision handling web security in the long run. You will see, if you read that tech note, that almost all of the web security work is not yet done. So again, as Rossi said, this is not work that we're likely to start immediately because we have other higher priority things that we have to deliver before we start operations. But expect to see another round of this. And that will, when that happens, there will be some other, just so that you can kind of be anticipating down the road, there will be some other kind of pretty significant changes to the way that the RSP is laid out. In particular, we will probably need to switch to a model where not everything runs in the same domain, in the same host name, but we would use separate host names for different components because otherwise the web security problem is very difficult to actually resolve.
All right, thank you. And so 2 more little quick things before we pass on to our other colleagues. So number one, the Mobu has had a large number of real refactoring infrastructural improvements, but the one that makes me happiest is that, because I'm such a shallow person, is that now the Slack alerts coming from Mobu on our monitoring channels are super nicely formatted, so you can straight away see what happened, where it happened, and you know, chase down the alert to figure out whether this is something that is known or whether there's a new behavior in the testing. So this is an example of one of the users that we have, the fake users. Oh, I'm not supposed to say fake now. I forgot what the I'm supposed to say. The simulated, okay. The simulated users that you know, is actually running notebooks to test the service. In this particular case, it had a timeout, so it reported it. And also this slide is already out of date as of yesterday because now we have the beautiful expanding messages, but this is an example of the alerts that can go out through semaphore to the main service. All right, so that is it from us. Oh,
Rossi?
yeah.
There are a couple of follow-on questions for Russ.
Oh, excellent. Okay, go for it.
So will there be an API or some signed attestation infrastructure to check whether a user is allowed to access a specific data release? An
external API? Is that the question?
I believe so. Mario can clarify.
I think for us, that's exactly one of the things that I was suggesting we would do that we haven't discussed.
I know, but currently it is currently not planned, although as I mentioned, it has come up in other contexts.
Yeah. We should leave it there, but I think it's one of those things we're going to end.
And actually, let me just since I'm sorry, I don't want to sweep this under the carpet. The issue about an external API is that if you ask whether user X is allowed to do thing Y, you and the person calling that API had better have the same idea as who user X is. And this is the architecturally difficult issue that we have not yet addressed. You know, from a programmatic point of view, from a service layer, you know, if you want an internal API that runs within the system that can do that, we could absolutely do that. And in fact, that's how a service is going to work. They say, is this user in this group that is allowed to do X? You know, see this table, see this file, access the service, and that's how entirely how architecturally it is. The issue with doing it externally is the source of identity problem. The experience with CI login,
email addresses are unique. We can have a database of email addresses, and you better use the email address you gave us, otherwise it doesn't work. I mean, there are ways around these problems without making them perfect. You know.
There are ways around these problems of which currently zero are planned. I'm just going to say, but we are thinking about it. I will go. Stay tuned on that one. The next question was, I am going to totally throw that one to Russ because even though I know what the answer is, what has been our experience so far with CI logon and co-manage?
Yeah. So I would separate the two of them for that purposes of that discussion. CI logon, it abstracts out the SAML authentication to a federation for you. That is definitely code that I have no desire to write or maintain, and CI logon does a wonderful job with it. Very, very happy with using CI logon as our provider to translate the SAML federation world into an OpenID Connect authentication that we can deal with. The co-manage as for an identity management system, it's a little bit less clear that this is a great match to the specific set of problems that Ruben has, I think is probably the right way to say this. There are some things that are very, very good and very solid that we're quite fond of. There are other things that they're not quite what we're looking for. So I think we're still thinking about how to handle that. The onboarding process and the approval process and all of those flows, those are very difficult to design. CoManage has done all of that work. And so there's a very coherent way of bringing new people on board and approving them and understanding what state they're in. And there's a ton of complexity there. It's very difficult to build a generic system to do that. And I think they've done a very good job. The group management story, everybody has a different idea of how they want to handle groups. And so it's probably not super surprising that the way that CoManage thinks of groups is not the way that I think of groups. And therefore there's some impedance mismatches and some discomfort. And so I think we've not entirely figured out how we want to move forward with that part of it yet.
Yes, and going back to Michael's thought experiment of $1 million, I'm going to say, I think Russ is itching to write his own group management system, and I keep going, oh, we don't have time for this. So we are still circling around this particular problem. Mary also dropped a link to Kafka authentication with CL login integration. I will click on that and look at that later. I'm not sure what it is. We are very heavy Kafka users in a couple of parts of the project, including in Square for the engineering facilities database system. That is the live telemetry system for the telescope. But there is actually no Kafka currently in the science platform. Also, one thing that I do want to clarify there, because I think it may not have been totally obvious from what I was saying, is that we have some plans for using Kafka as a backend data transport layer for some of our internal components, but we don't currently have a use case for users to authenticate to Kafka. So integration for users to be able to authenticate to Kafka is not something we currently have a use case for. Yeah. I will also say that I probably should have mentioned this earlier. We're actually having a candidate for our first non-VO API service coming on board of the Science platform, and that's Spence's alert filtering service that he's developing. And this is an example of a service that was actually not developed by us as part of the Science requirements, but it wishes to kind of come home to the RSP in order to share access to all those other service kind of helper infrastructure like authentication, authorization, ingress management, and so on. So I'm actually very optimistic about this model going forward. And in fact, I would argue that that model is actually superior in some cases to run your own RSP. It's just ship your service to my RSP. But that's all stuff that we have to discuss within the general IDEC context going forward. I want to give some airtime to our friends. Bastien, are you driving? I have your slide. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Frosty.
So maybe you can start by telling us if are you talking about your 2 deployments or?
No, okay. So for this talk, I'm talking only about the deployment that I'm in charge of, which is the deployment that we have at CCN2P3. I know that Dominique Boutini and Sabine L have been working on another deployment on the lab, and I will not talk on their behalf, but you can be sure that we talk a lot about our respective deployments, and I think we are not too far off from each other on our current state of the RSP in general. Okay, so I'll start with the current state in which we are at CCN2P3 specifically. So my fork is available on GitHub. We synced to upstream in late June this year, so maybe I should sync back again now. I will think about it, but basically we have some of the latest features, like the new landing page and everything. So our cluster is deployed on bare metal servers. We have a 25 nodes cluster running Kubernetes 119. It's deployed via Puppet with the Kubernetes module. In this cluster, we have 5 nodes which are entirely dedicated to RSP, while the others are used for QServe mainly. So these servers are pretty robust. As you can see, we have 20 cores and over 200 gigabits of RAM. Some tweaks were necessary compared to what configuration is used on the IDF, for example. We're not using cluster IP for ingress, but node ports, and we had to manually create our persistent volumes because we don't have a Google to rely on to do that automatically. We are using the IDF Vault instance. So we are not relying on our own instance for the moment. So we have a dedicated environment at RSPCC there. And one thing I noted is that we initially planned to deploy the RSP on machines which only have proxy access to internet. So we have a Squid HTTP proxy that we use to access HTTP over the internet for all these machines, and they were isolated on a private network otherwise. But this proved to be blocking for some services of the RSP. I think specifically Nublado, when I deployed it, was trying to establish a connection, and there was no way to make this connection through the proxy. So in the end, we finally we ended by reconfiguring our cluster nodes to have direct internet connectivity, and from this change, everything started to work fine. So now we have the notebooks, so Nublado 2, and the portal, which are available at this URL. It's using GitHub authentication for the moment. But in our plans, we are thinking about how we could integrate to other OIDC authentication providers. Specifically, we use here at the CN2P3 Keycloak for our OIDC needs. So I think that would be great if we had a way to integrate the RSP with our Keycloak instance at CC. Currently, the RSP is using purely local storage, local disk. So we are thinking to moving to a shared file system, especially for notebooks, because at the moment you can't be sure that the notebook that you start will start on the same machine that it started on last time. So you're not sure that you will find the same files when you reconnect. So we want to move to a shared file system, but this was just for test purposes. We would also like to be able to integrate to the CCN2P3 QServe instance, which is running on the same cluster. For that, we need to explore how to use TAP and how to populate the TAP schemas to match the locally available catalogs that we have loaded in our QServe instance. And finally, we would like to understand what it would require to migrate to a local Vault instance instead of using the IDF one. So basically, that's all we have for now.
Excellent, excellent, and a great set of questions. Thank you, Bastien. And I'm going to say that this is one of the situations that was like fantastic for us, because we were like, wait, they're trying to deploy this science for everyone without internet access. Like, it never occurred to us that anybody would try to do that. So that was a great learning experience, and you were great guinea pigs for it. And thank you very much. Okay, let's go through some of those questions. Let's see. Christine, can I throw you the question about how we're now handling the per instance TAP schemas, which is a very recent kind of over the summer kind of development?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a little tricky, and it might be a sweetheart. Don't get on the laptop. Sorry, that was my cat there for a moment. So it might be better to just handle this in Slack and do it in email, but there is a place where you can put the Felis files, which are YAML files that say what columns there are, what tables there are, what the types are, and stuff like that. And that ends up getting pushed into a Docker container. So, but we've kind of changed that a little bit and streamlined that process. But yeah, we can follow up on that. I don't want to get too much into the technical details, just because it's probably easier to walk through it on GitHub rather than through a meeting. But Yeah.
Yeah, so we're happy to have a special break for that. I will just say, just to give a little context, so Felis is a package developed by Brian Van Claveren, who I think is also on this call, through his work for data management architecture, I believe. And what it does is essentially kind of our source of truth for schema information in the system. And so we consume those files in the YAML files to generate the tag schema for them. And our operational model, which is, in operations, we're going to have a data curation team. Hello, Gregory. Is going to be this, that essentially the science level interaction is with the Felis files, and then we have automated production tooling to actually generate type schema information and other schema information that we may need from them. If you're interested, by all means, Bastien, ask us, and we'll schedule just a deep dive on that part. Russ, do you want to handle integration to other IDC auth providers? Is there anything we can do to tell Bastien something he needs to know here?
No, my hope is that this should mostly just work. We have not actually tested it with another OIDC auth provider. We were hoping that we would have gotten to that because we are going to need to use a different OIDC auth provider at the summit eventually, so that we can the RSP deployment there will not go down if they lose link to the outside world. But that's been put off for a whole bunch of other reasons, like they're very busy with other things. So we haven't actually tested this yet, but in theory, it's generic. In theory, we should be able to use any OIDC auth provider. Certainly, as soon as you start trying it, you're probably going to run into some bugs. Let us know, and we should hopefully be able to turn around fixes for those.
Okay, thank you. Oh, there's one thing that I've noticed is that in the Helm chart, I think there are hard references to the CI logon provider. So maybe this will be the plugging point.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. I had forgotten that I did that. Yeah, the chart currently simplifies things too much for that use case. So yeah, we can work with you to make the chart a little bit more generic so that that stuff is configurable.
Awesome, thank you.
Brian's got a hand up.
I was just gonna say that, yeah, there's a few things with just when you do the CI logon, it's expecting to see some group information in a particular claim. I'm not, in theory, that's configurable by Keycloak, but I think some amount of code needs to be changed, or you can actually, I had been looking at to solve other problems, but similarly looking at something a little more flexible, which is the Ori Hydra to do some of this stuff, because you can have a lot more control over the claims, and you could mimic CI logon, or we could have a standard interface of claims. But just more generally, I think we might have to tackle that. And because like at Slack, we're going to have a USDF will have an RSP, but there will be a staff only RSP at Slack too. So we'll have to figure that out there too. But they will plug into different identity providers. Anyway, just
all right.
Yeah,
Okay.
the group handling from OIDC right now currently essentially hard codes the way that NCSA was doing it. We should be able to make some of that configurable. I've just held off on held off on making that configurable because I don't know what configuration will be needed. So don't feel like you have to entirely match the current expectations of Gavile in whatever OIDC provider you have. Like, we're willing to add configuration parameters on the Gavile side. I just need somebody to tell me what they should look like.
All right, and just to explain the last point of Bastien, so we use Vault for Kubernetes deployment secrets and service secrets. Vault is a little bit tricky to set up if you've never done this before, so we currently operate Vault also on behalf of some of our external users, but obviously, going forward, it's not a good idea for us to be a single point of failure. So this is something that we're very happy to support you doing. All right, thank you very much, Bastien. Like, huge progress, and that's just really great and great to see. All right, so across the channel then, I almost said across the pond, and that was definitely the wrong geographical reference. So we, oh, where is my slide? Hang on a minute. Just want to just put it in.
Technically, I think across the pond is correct from you to them.
Yes, but not from France, not from France to the UK. Why is this slide not showing? Oh.
Sometimes it takes a long time to refresh. Is the next one in your deck?
Yeah, it's the last one, but I did add it. There we go.
Oh, yeah, if you added it later, then, and we're in position.
Yes, I did not realize that was going to happen.
Yeah, it doesn't.
All right. Okay, so the UK, I'm going to hand over to Stelios, but just to say that they also have a deployment of the RSP. They've got a link on it, and they're also participating through the in-kind program and operations with directed effort to help support that activity. And Stelios, you want to talk us a little bit about your updates?
Yeah, sure. So hi for me, and thanks for hosting this. It's always very useful for us to get updates and development roadmaps for the RSP. A brief introduction for those who don't know me. I'm Stelios Vucinas. I work as a developer at the University of Edinburgh. So we've been experimenting with the RSP for a while now. Started as an evaluation project for us to understand and decide if we can use the RSP and deploy an instance of our own as a platform for the UK Rubin community. The evaluation process concluded that it does fill the needs of our users as well as those of our developers. So we decided to adopt it and take this forward by deploying and running a first pilot version for internal R&D users. This version has been running for a few months now without major issues. And the user-facing components are currently being tested by our users. This version is deployed on our OpenStack cloud infrastructure. We are deploying with the recommended recipe of using Argo CD and a forked repository of the Phalanx project. Our fork version doesn't introduce a large amount of changes currently. I think the main differences in our setup is that we don't use any of the Google or Amazon services. Our Kubernetes storage class uses Cinder, which is the OpenStack block storage technology. So there's perhaps one extra step there where we run a command to create the storage class. Sorry. And we also have so we're using a manually created university certificate, which we've added to the Vault service as a first easy option, I would say. We are aiming to moving to Let's Encrypt for a more automated process, hopefully within the next year. Our users are authenticated and whitelisted via GitHub. So we set up a GitHub organization that we're using for that. Should mention we are still using the Rubin Vault service. However, we have experimented with the local Vault service, and we are planning on hopefully soon moving to that. So looking forward to our short and longer term goals. One of the first things we'd like to tackle is to upgrade our deployment to include persistent storage, most likely with NFS. We'd like to investigate whether and how we can also we can customize the Firefly portal. Specifically, we'd like to be able to add UK tab services to the list that appear in the main tab query page. And we'd like to be able to change which service the portal defaults to, if possible. Ideally, this could be a value in the configuration of the environment. I'm not sure how complicated that is. There's also been interest from the Lazer project, which is a UK project aiming to serve as a Rubin event broker for potentially using the RSP or components of it. So we'd like to investigate what can be changed in the UI to serve those use cases, how easy it is, and what's the effect in terms of operations cost, as it probably means maintaining separate or in parallel Docker images, configuration files, which may obviously make the process of bug fixing and picking up newer versions a bit more complicated. We're also looking into integrating a UK-based QServe instance into the RSP. So that means basically looking into the API side of the RSP and seeing how we can point it to that instance. As I understand, it's probably as simple as just adding the right credentials and host in the right configuration file. The other thing to mention is that we have previously talked about merging our changes, which introduce our own environment upstream into the main balance repo. As I remember, the idea was that this would make it easier to pick up major changes and bug fixes, as these would be pick them up and deploy from our own repository. This was supposed to happen a couple months ago. However, at the time, I ran into some problems when trying to merge the upstream changes to our environment, and I also ran into some problems with our OpenStack cluster, which did require some time debugging. And by the time I had solved these, by the time these were solved, the main repo had moved on a bit. So basically, I want to wait till I can merge once more and push a more up-to-date version. And I mean, I have been away from the project for the last few months. I am scheduled to have some bursts of effort over the next few months again, so hopefully this should happen soon. And I think the last thing to mention is that we are also planning on looking into accounting and seeing what's required in terms of being able to manage and automate user registrations and access, as well as looking into things like quotas and limits for users. And I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Thos. That's really great. And I know Gregory has his hand up, and there's some Slack questions as well. So Gregory, you go ahead.
So regarding adding the UK services, that's very straightforward. At the moment, that would be a very minor code change to the top level file from the portal application. So you could fork that, and I can show you how to make that change. We've been looking at moving that into a config file so that you could provide it more through the kind of the Helm chart kind of mechanisms. That's something that would be a straightforward change. Right now, it's a couple lines of JavaScript, but just contact me directly and we'll explain how to do that.
All right, and there was some question in the Slack I saw flash out. Simon.
Yeah,
Iris?
can you expand on the Iris accounting service?
That's probably a question for George Beckett more than me, but it's essentially just a matter of figuring out how we can have users register to our service. Currently, we're using GitHub for as the OAuth application, but we are looking towards Iris-specific OAuth alternatives like IAM. So potentially, it's just a matter of figuring out how we can plug that in, and then yeah, how that ties into things like groups and then user quotas and all of that. But yeah, this part of the slide was written by George, so probably he's better suited to answer more specifics.
All right. We're good. So much good stuff happening. Oh, do we have anything else? Does anybody want to bring any common questions, concerns, frustrations? I will say, you know, once again that we really appreciate all these teams working with us on this. At some point, I would like to leverage all this brain power to try and improve our some of our kind of basic documentation around these issues, but I know the time for this hasn't quite come yet. But let's see, we are close to the end of time, and we have to somehow produce 2 summary slides in the next 15 minutes. So is there anything else anybody would like to discuss? All right, so what I hear is it's going well. No surprises, everybody's making progress, and as always, by all means, hit us up with questions, advice, and so on. All right, and as I said, we're going to do this again next year. You know, maybe get a longer session to provide some more introductory material to RSP deployment curious populations, and it's really good to see the service used. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks everybody. You've made it almost to the end of PCW as well, so congratulations for that too. All right.
Bye.
See ya.